On the morning of December 17, 1967, the leader of a nation walked into the sea and never returned. Harold Holt, the 17th Prime Minister of Australia, vanished before the eyes of friends, colleagues, and security personnel. His disappearance became one of the greatest political mysteries of the 20th century, a riddle that remains unsolved to this day. For a country that had never before experienced the sudden loss of a sitting prime minister, the event was almost unbelievable. No body was ever recovered, no trace ever found. In the years that followed, Australians debated endlessly: was it a tragic accident, or was there something far darker at play? To understand the disappearance, we must first understand the man. Harold Edward Holt was born in Sydney in 1908, the son of Thomas Holt and Olive Williams. His childhood was marked by instability. His parents separated when he was young, and his early years were spent shifting between homes. Despite this, he grew into a resilient, independent young man with a natural charm. At Melbourne University, he studied law, but it was not only his intellect that attracted attention. He was athletic, adventurous, and had a deep love for the outdoors. The ocean, in particular, fascinated him. To Holt, the sea was not merely a place of leisure. It was a challenge, a companion, and sometimes an obsession. Politics came early into his life. In 1935, at just 27, Holt entered Parliament as a member of the United Australia Party, which would later merge into the Liberal Party. His career advanced quickly. He became known as a skilled debater, a loyal lieutenant, and by the late 1940s, a key figure in Robert Menzies' government. Holt's rise to power was steady and inevitable, and when Menzies retired in January 1966, Holt assumed the role of Prime Minister. The Australia Holt inherited was a nation caught between tradition and transformation. Internationally, the Cold War raged, and the United States was deeply embroiled in Vietnam. Holt aligned himself closely with Washington, famously declaring his support for President Lyndon B. Johnson with the phrase, "All the way with LBJ." It was a slogan that made headlines, but also sparked controversy. Sending Australian troops to Vietnam divided the nation. While some admired Holt's loyalty to allies, others condemned him for dragging Australia into what they saw as America's war. Domestically, Holt was more progressive than many realized. He oversaw the dismantling of elements of the White Australia policy, opening the door to multiculturalism. He expanded access to education and was viewed as personable, modern, and charismatic. Yet behind the polished image lay complexities. Holt was known for his extramarital affairs, most famously with a woman named Zara, who would later become his second wife. He balanced the weight of leadership with an intense personal life, often retreating to the sea as both an escape and a test of endurance. Friends would later recall that Holt treated the ocean almost competitively. He was fearless, often reckless, swimming in rough waters others would not dare enter. It was this recklessness that brought him to Cheviot Beach on that fateful day. Cheviot, located near Portsea on the Mornington Peninsula, about 90 kilometers from Melbourne, was beautiful but dangerous. Known for its treacherous rip currents and powerful surf, it was rarely recommended for swimming. Locals avoided it, but Holt loved the challenge. On that Sunday morning, he invited friends for a weekend at his holiday home. Among them was Zara, his close companion, as well as other political and social acquaintances. Just before noon, the group drove to Cheviot Beach. The weather was warm, the waves lively but not extreme. Standing on the sand, some guests hesitated. The sea looked powerful, unpredictable. Holt, however, seemed eager. He strode confidently into the water, waving off concerns. Witnesses later said he appeared to be swimming strongly, heading further out. But then, in an instant, it changed. A large wave rolled over him. His head disappeared beneath the surface. A few seconds passed. He then screamed. Those on the beach could do little. Was notorious. Attempts to rush in were halted by the sheer force of the surf. They waited desperately for Holt to reappear, scanning the waves for any sign of his head, his arms a hand raised for help. But nothing came. The Prime Minister of Australia had vanished into the sea. The alarm spread immediately. Within hours, the largest search operation in the nation's history was underway. Navy divers scoured the depths. Helicopters hovered above the surf. Hundreds of volunteers combed the shoreline. But as the sun set on the first day, there was still no trace. The search continued into the night, then into the next day. 2 days of relentless searching produced nothing, no body, no clothing, no shred of evidence. It was as if the ocean had swallowed him whole. Australia was in shock. Newspapers blared headlines in disbelief. Prime Minister missing at sea. Crowds gathered outside Parliament and government offices. The Governor General was forced to announce Holt's presumed death, though many found it hard to believe without a body. Around the world, leaders sent condolences. President Johnson described Holt as a loyal friend. Harold Wilson in Britain expressed deep sorrow. Yet beneath the formal tributes, a strange unease settled in. How could a prime minister simply vanish in broad daylight in front of witnesses without leaving a single trace? The official explanation was simple. Harold Holt drowned. He was known to be reckless in the ocean, and Cheviot Beach was notoriously dangerous. Strong currents could have dragged him under, while sharks or the vastness of the sea may have ensured no remains were ever found. But for many, this explanation felt too neat, too convenient. In the absence of hard evidence, alternative theories began to flourish. One theory suggested Holt had been taken by a shark. Australian waters are home to some of the deadliest sharks in the world, and a sudden attack could explain the lack of a body. Yet witnesses on the beach reported no signs of thrashing, no blood in the water, no disturbance that would accompany a violent attack. Experts argued that while possible, such an attack was unlikely without leaving evidence. Another theory whispered of suicide. By late 1967, Holt was under enormous political pressure. The Vietnam War was growing increasingly unpopular. Protests were breaking out across the country. His once high approval ratings were slipping. Some speculated that Holt, overwhelmed, may have chosen to end his life in the ocean he loved. But those who knew him rejected this idea. Friends described him as vibrant, optimistic, and passionate about life. His mistress Zara insisted that suicide was unthinkable. Then came the conspiracies, wilder, darker, and far more dramatic. One of the most enduring was that Holt had been kidnapped by the CIA. According to this theory, Holt either knew too much or was secretly working with U.S. intelligence. A submarine, some claimed, had been waiting just offshore, and Holt swam out deliberately or was taken against his will. In the Cold War atmosphere of the 1960s, such ideas did not seem entirely implausible to some Australians, yet no evidence has ever emerged to support the claim. Another version swapped the Americans for the Chinese. Some argued Holt was sympathetic to China and that he defected, spirited away by a waiting submarine beneath the waves. Again, there was no evidence, only speculation. The sheer theatricality of such claims gave them life, even as officials dismissed them. The most romantic theory was that Holt staged his own disappearance. Tired of politics, weighed down by personal and professional pressures, he used the sea as cover to escape and live under a new identity. Some believed he slipped away to Asia. Others suggested he remained hidden in Australia. But the reality of orchestrating such a plan, especially in front of witnesses, made this theory unlikely. Still, the idea of a prime minister choosing to vanish by choice fascinated the public. As days turned to weeks and weeks to years, the mystery only deepened. Without a body, closure was impossible. Parliament moved on John McEwen, became caretaker prime minister, and soon John Gorton assumed leadership. But Holt's disappearance hung over the nation like a shadow. Zara Holt gave interviews, always maintaining that her husband's death was a tragic accident, nothing more. She described Harold as reckless with the sea, sometimes too confident in his abilities, and believed that the ocean simply claimed him that day. In 1969, a memorial service was held in his honor, attended by world leaders and dignitaries. Yet, even as they mourned, the questions remained. The years transformed Harold Holt from a prime minister into a legend. His disappearance became part of Australian folklore, referenced in books, films, and even humor. In Melbourne, in an irony not lost on anyone, a public swimming pool was named the Harold Holt Memorial Swimming Center. The dark joke that a man who drowned had a pool named after him was a testament to the odd place. Holt's story holds in Australian culture, but beneath the jokes, the unease persists. Holt's disappearance was not just the loss of a leader, it was the loss of certainty. Australians are used to accidents, to tragedies, but not to mysteries that leave no answer. The image of a prime minister, walking into the surf and never returning, is one that haunts the national imagination even decades later. Over 50 years have passed since that day at Cheviot Beach. The waves still crash, the currents still swirl, and the sea keeps its secrets. Did Harold Holt drown, carried far out into the ocean, his body claimed by sharks or the relentless tide? Or was there something more: espionage, defection, or a carefully staged escape? We may never know. The official records say drowning. The public imagination says otherwise. What remains is the story itself. The story of a leader who vanished in broad daylight. The story of a mystery that no search could solve. The story of a man whose life was bound to the sea, and whose end, whatever it may have been, was written in its depths. History is filled with mysteries, but few as strange as this. A prime minister who walked into the ocean and never came back. A nation left in shock. A legacy forever tied to an unanswered question. Harold Holt is gone. The ocean claimed him, or perhaps something else did. But what is certain is that the mystery endures, and with it, the haunting reminder that sometimes even the most powerful among us can vanish without a trace.